For years, Michael and Vanessa Reeves had mastered the art of looking happy. At neighborhood dinners, they arrived together, smiled for photographs, and spoke about vacations they might take someday. Michael was successful, composed, and careful with his words. Vanessa was warm, fashionable, and increasingly conscious of how she looked beside him. To anyone watching, they seemed secure. Only Vanessa knew how often silence had begun replacing conversation. After her cosmetic surgery, Vanessa had convinced herself that things would improve. She had wanted the procedure partly for herself, but she could not deny another hope buried beneath that decision. She wanted Michael to look at her the way he once had. Instead, he looked away. At first, Michael blamed the discomfort on recovery. Then Vanessa noticed him avoiding the bedroom. He started sleeping in the guest room, claiming he needed better rest. When she asked whether something was wrong, he insisted everything was fine. But it was not fine. There was a persistent odor that had developed after the surgery, something Vanessa could not understand, and could barely acknowledge without feeling ashamed. She showered repeatedly, changed products, washed clothes more often, and quietly searched for possible explanations. Michael offered no useful help. His expressions whenever she approached him said more than his words ever did. One evening, Vanessa stood in the bathroom doorway, while Michael prepared for bed. "Is it really that bad?" she asked. Michael paused. "I don't want to talk about this. You're my husband. Who am I supposed to talk to?" He avoided her eyes. "You should see a doctor." "I already have." "Then see another one." The answer hurt more than she expected. Over the following weeks, the distance became impossible to ignore. Michael stopped touching her. He avoided kissing her. Even ordinary affection seemed to embarrass him. Vanessa began wondering whether the problem was truly the odor, or whether Michael had simply found something he could use to justify leaving. Her suspicion grew when she noticed changes in his routine. He guarded his phone. He came home later. He smiled at messages he refused to explain. When Vanessa asked whether there was someone else, Michael became defensive rather than offended. "Why do you keep accusing me?" "Because you don't look at me anymore. That has nothing to do with anyone else." "Then look at me." He couldn't. That silence told Vanessa more than any confession could have. She began remembering small moments from months earlier, Michael turning his phone face down, sudden overtime, unexplained expenses, and conversations that ended whenever she entered the room. The odor had become the easiest explanation for everything. But Vanessa was beginning to believe it was only the excuse. One night, she found Michael sitting alone at the kitchen table, divorce papers spread before him. Her stomach tightened. "You were going to tell me?" Michael folded the papers slowly. Vanessa waited. For several seconds, neither spoke. Vanessa felt the room tilt around her. The humiliation seemed larger than the surgery, larger than the unanswered questions. If Michael had already decided, every cruel silence had been leading toward this moment. She stared at him, searching for the husband she remembered. Then Michael looked at her, his expression exhausted rather than angry. "I don't think I can stay married to you anymore." Michael's words remained in Vanessa's mind long after he left the kitchen. "I don't think I can stay married to you anymore." She replayed them while lying awake that night, staring into the darkness beside an empty pillow. There had been a time when Michael's presence had made her feel safe. Now, even the sound of his footsteps moving through the house made her tense. By morning, Vanessa had decided she needed answers. She made another appointment with her doctor. She described the odor carefully, her voice lowered with embarrassment, as though someone might overhear her. The doctor listened, examined her, and explained that complications could have several causes. Vanessa left with instructions, medication, and another appointment. But medical answers did not explain Michael. He had changed before she understood why. Vanessa began remembering their first years together, Michael had once waited outside her workplace with flowers when she had a terrible day. When she caught the flu, he stayed beside her, bringing soup and checking her temperature through the night. He used to kiss her forehead before leaving for work. She remembered how he once defended her when a relative criticized her appearance, telling everyone that Vanessa never needed to change. That memory felt impossible to reconcile with the man sitting across. She wondered when tenderness had turned into contempt, and whether she failed to notice the transformation until it was too late. Those memories felt cruel now, because the same man who had once protected her now seemed determined to make her feel ashamed. When Vanessa asked whether the odor disgusted him, Michael answered without looking at her. "It makes intimacy difficult." She swallowed hard. "You could still be kind." "I'm being honest." "No. You're being cruel." Michael sighed. "I shouldn't have to pretend everything is normal." Vanessa stared at him, stunned by how easily he reduced their marriage to something that embarrassed him. She tried everything. Different soaps. Different clothing. More medical consultations. More appointments. She even stopped going out with friends because she feared they might notice something. Nothing seemed to satisfy Michael. Then she noticed another change. He had started meeting someone regularly. Vanessa did not know who at first. She only knew that Michael began leaving the house with a folder under his arm and returning with the distant expression of someone who had already made important decisions. One afternoon, while sorting through mail, Vanessa found an unfamiliar business card. Daniel Harper, attorney at law. The discovery made her hands tremble. When Michael returned, she held the card up. "Who is Daniel Harper?" Michael stopped. For the first time, Vanessa saw something unmistakable in his face. Fear. "He's my attorney." The word seemed to drain the room of air. "You hired an attorney?" Michael rubbed his forehead. "Vanessa, I was going to tell you." "When?" He said nothing. She demanded the truth, and eventually Michael admitted that he had already discussed divorce with Harper. The consultation had happened weeks earlier, before Vanessa's latest medical appointment, before she had even understood how serious the marriage had become. Vanessa felt something inside her break. All this time, she had been trying to repair herself. Michael had been planning how to leave her. Later that evening, Vanessa searched through the house for anything that might explain when he had made his decision. She found nothing definitive, but the absence itself felt like evidence. Her marriage had not suddenly collapsed. It had been ending quietly while she was still fighting to save it. And somewhere beyond their walls, Michael had already begun preparing for a life without her. The realization that her marriage had been ending without her knowledge left Vanessa unable to sleep. For 2 nights, she moved through the house like a stranger, searching for an explanation that would make Michael's decision feel less personal. Instead, every answer seemed to lead somewhere darker. Michael had become protective of his phone months earlier. He carried it everywhere, even inside the bathroom. He changed the password and turned the screen away whenever messages appeared. Vanessa had noticed, but she had been too focused on repairing herself to question him. Now she questioned everything. One evening, Michael left his phone charging on the kitchen counter while he showered. Vanessa stared at it for several minutes. She knew crossing that boundary would change something between them forever. Then a message appeared. "Miss you. Wish you were here." There was no name, only a number. Vanessa's hands began shaking. She opened the message. The conversation that followed destroyed the last piece of certainty she had been holding on to. There were dozens of messages. Some were ordinary, discussing work and meetings. Others were intimate enough to make Vanessa feel physically sick. They spoke about loneliness, trust, dinners together, and a future neither of them seemed willing to call an affair. Then Vanessa saw the name. Claire Morgan. She recognized it. Claire worked in Michael's office. The discovery forced Vanessa to reconsider every recent insult. The criticism about the odor suddenly sounded different. Maybe Michael had not been searching for a solution at all. Maybe he had been searching for permission to stop feeling guilty about leaving. She remembered his cold expression whenever she tried to hold his hand, the unexplained smiles when he checked his phone, and the evenings when he claimed he was working late. Each memory now carried a second meaning. For weeks, Vanessa had blamed her body. Now she wondered whether Michael had simply needed her to believe she was the reason he wanted out. That possibility made her anger feel almost unbearable. Vanessa kept scrolling. Claire had become Michael's emotional refuge. He complained to her about the marriage. She comforted him when he felt trapped. He told her things Vanessa had not heard in years. He spoke about starting over. One message made Vanessa stop breathing. "I wish I could wake up beside you every morning." Another followed from Claire. "Someday you will." Vanessa heard the shower turn off. She placed the phone exactly where she had found it, and stepped away, but something inside her had already changed. The shame she had carried for weeks was becoming anger. When Michael entered the kitchen, Vanessa was waiting. "Who is Claire?" He froze. For several seconds, neither spoke. "She's a coworker." "Don't lie to me." "I'm not." "You tell her you wish you could wake up beside her." Michael looked away. Vanessa's voice cracked. "How long?" "It became complicated." "Complicated?" He finally admitted that Claire had become important to him, although he insisted they had not begun a physical relationship while he was still married. Vanessa laughed bitterly. "You think that makes this better? I never wanted to hurt you. You planned a life with her while telling me I was the problem." Michael's expression hardened. "Our marriage was already broken. Because of her?" "Not only because of her." That answer hurt more than a confession. Vanessa realized Michael was not simply leaving her. He had already emotionally replaced her. She walked away before she said something she would regret. But later that night, while sitting alone in the bedroom, Vanessa found another conversation. This one was newer. Michael had written to Claire only days earlier. "Once the divorce is final, I want to marry you." Vanessa stared at the screen until the words blurred. She had thought Michael was leaving because their marriage had failed. Now she understood. He was leaving because he had already chosen someone else. The message stayed on Vanessa's phone after she stopped reading it. "Once the divorce is final, I want to marry you." She could not stop hearing those words in Michael's voice. They followed her from room to room, appearing in her thoughts whenever she looked in the mirror. The odor, the surgery, the nights he had refused to touch her, every cruel comment suddenly seemed connected. She began replaying conversations she had once tried to forget. "You need to do something about yourself. I can barely stand being close to you. Maybe you should accept that things have changed." Each sentence returned with greater force, stripped of the excuses she had once made for him. Vanessa stopped recognizing the woman she had been before the surgery. She studied her reflection for hours, searching for whatever Michael had supposedly found so unbearable. Some days, she convinced herself that if she had chosen differently, behaved differently, or looked different, he might still love her. Other days, anger replaced the shame. She saw a pattern. Michael had not simply fallen out of love. In her mind, he had carefully dismantled her confidence until she became too insecure to question what was happening. While she blamed herself, he had been building another life with Claire. That thought consumed her. Her friend Melissa noticed first. "You're disappearing," Melissa said during a visit. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." Vanessa turned away. Melissa placed a hand on her shoulder. "Come stay with me for a few days." "I can't." "Why?" "Because I need to understand what he did." Melissa looked worried. "Understanding him won't change what happened." Vanessa said nothing. After Melissa left, Vanessa began organizing everything. She created folders on her laptop containing screenshots of Michael's messages. She photographed documents, copied financial records, saved receipts, and wrote down dates when Michael stayed away overnight. She kept notes about every conversation she could remember. At first, the collection felt like preparation for divorce. Soon, it became something else. It became proof. Proof that she had not imagined the betrayal. Proof that she had not destroyed the marriage alone. Proof that Michael had chosen Claire while making Vanessa feel defective. Days later, Michael came home to collect more belongings. Vanessa confronted him in the hallway. "You made me believe I was disgusting." Michael sighed. "We've been over this." "No. You've avoided it. I told you the truth. You humiliated me. I never asked you to change your life for me. You made me feel like I wasn't worth touching." Michael's patience disappeared. "Vanessa, no amount of surgery can repair what happened between us." The word struck harder than he intended. She stared at him. Then her expression changed. "You're wrong." Michael frowned. "You didn't leave because of my condition." "What are you talking about? You left because you had already chosen her." Michael looked toward the door. "Claire has nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with it." He shook his head. "Our marriage was broken before Claire. Then why were you promising to marry her?" Michael went silent. Vanessa saw the answer in his face. Neither moved. Outside, evening settled over the street, turning the windows dark. Inside, years of resentment gathered between them. Michael finally picked up his bag. "This is over." Vanessa watched him walk away. She wanted to stop him. She wanted to scream. Instead, she stood still, unaware that this confrontation would become one of the last moments they would ever share. The marriage was already ending. Neither of them understood how close it was to becoming something far permanent. The silence after Michael walked away did not last. 3 days later, Vanessa received the divorce papers. They arrived in a thick envelope that seemed impossibly heavy in her hands. She stood beside the front door, staring at Michael's name printed across the documents, and felt something inside her collapse. The decision was no longer a threat hanging over the marriage. It had become official. Michael had moved out. His clothes were gone from the closet. His shoes no longer sat beside hers. The bathroom shelf where he kept his razor was empty. Even the coffee mug he always used had disappeared. Vanessa hated how quickly a person could erase himself from a home. She read the papers twice, then placed them on the kitchen table. The legal language made everything sound simple. Property, assets, separation, dissolution. Nothing in those pages described the nights Vanessa had spent crying, the humiliation she believed Michael had inflicted on her, or the messages she had discovered between him and Claire. Paper reduced a marriage to signatures. While Vanessa struggled with the reality of losing hers, Detective Olivia Grant was spending another afternoon at the police station discussing a different domestic dispute. A colleague mentioned a couple whose arguments had escalated over several months. Grant listened carefully. "Relationship conflicts can become dangerous when resentment keeps building," she said. Her colleague nodded. "Especially when neither person knows when to walk away." Grant agreed, then returned to her paperwork. She had no reason to know that the conversation would soon feel strangely relevant. A week later, Michael contacted Vanessa. He wanted to meet at their former home to discuss the remaining property and financial arrangements. Vanessa almost refused. Instead, she agreed. Michael arrived shortly before sunset. He looked calm, carrying a folder containing documents. Vanessa noticed immediately how different he seemed outside the house. There was no hesitation in his movements anymore. He was already behaving like someone who belonged somewhere else. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. Michael opened the folder. We need to settle the house, accounts, and personal property. Vanessa stared at him. That's all you want to talk about? It's what we need to resolve. You destroyed our marriage, and you can't even admit it. Michael exhaled slowly. I'm not going to argue about the past. The past is why we're here. No. We're here because the marriage is over. Vanessa's voice rose. You humiliated me. I never intended to humiliate you. You made me hate myself. Michael looked away. You had surgery because you thought it would change something between us. It didn't. You still refuse to understand. I understand more than you think. No, you don't. She leaned forward. You betrayed my trust. You were planning a future with Claire while I was trying to save our marriage. Say it. Michael remained silent. Say it. I'm not apologizing for falling out of love. Vanessa's face tightened. That's not what I asked. Michael closed the folder. I'm done. He stood, picked up his coat, and walked toward the door. Vanessa followed him, but stopped several feet away. Michael turned. This is over, Vanessa. You need to accept that. She watched him leave. Through the front window, she saw his car pull away from the curb and disappear down the street. The house became silent again. Vanessa remained standing there, staring at the empty road. She did not know that Michael had just driven away from their final ordinary conversation. For a moment, she wondered whether this was what freedom looked like for him. Perhaps Claire was waiting, ready to welcome the man Vanessa had spent loving. The thought brought a wave of anger. She returned to the table and looked at the divorce papers. Something colder had taken their place. As night settled over the house, Vanessa began thinking carefully now about what she would do next. The message Vanessa sent Michael was simple. We need to talk. Please come back to the house tonight. There is something important I need to tell you. Michael read it twice before answering. He wanted as little contact with Vanessa as possible. Still, he believed one final conversation might prevent another argument later. He told Claire he would be gone only briefly. By the time he arrived, evening had settled over the neighborhood. The curtains were drawn. The hallway lights were dim. Nothing appeared unusual, yet Michael felt tension before he had even closed the front door. Vanessa stood in the living room. She looked exhausted. You came, she said. You said it was important. It is. Michael placed his keys on a table. Then tell me. Vanessa stared at him. I found another message. Michael's expression tightened. From Claire. He exhaled. Vanessa, we've already discussed this. No. We haven't. There is nothing more to discuss. You promised to marry her. Michael looked away. You were planning your future while I was still trying to save ours. Our marriage was over. You decided that without me. Michael's voice became harder. I told you I was leaving. You told me I was the problem. I never said that. You didn't have to. Vanessa stepped closer. You made me ashamed of myself. You made me believe there was something wrong with me. Michael shook his head. I never wanted you to feel that way. But you knew I did. I couldn't stay in a marriage just because you were unhappy. Vanessa stared at him, breathing unevenly. You could have stayed long enough to treat me like a human being. I did stay. You stayed while loving somebody else. Michael shook his head. This conversation is going nowhere. He turned toward the door. Vanessa moved in front of him. Move. No. Vanessa, move. I need you to admit what you did. I don't owe you another explanation. You owe me the truth. The truth is that I don't love you anymore. The words landed with devastating simplicity. Vanessa's face changed. Michael saw the anger in her eyes and immediately stepped backward. I'm leaving. You always leave. Because this marriage is finished. You think you can just walk away? Yes. He reached toward the door. Vanessa blocked him again. Tell me you never loved her. Michael stared at her. I'm not doing this. Tell me. I loved you once. Once? That's the truth. Vanessa's hands trembled. Michael reached for the door handle. Then the first gunshot shattered the house. Michael staggered backward. Vanessa stood several feet away, holding the weapon with both hands. Her face was blank. Then another shot exploded through the room. Michael cried out. The argument disappeared beneath the deafening sound. Another shot followed. Then another. There was no longer any conversation, only chaos. Vanessa's breathing became ragged as the weapon continued firing. Michael tried to move away, but the room seemed to shrink around him. 12 shots were fired. When the final echo faded, silence rushed into the house. Michael collapsed. Vanessa remained standing. For several seconds, she stared at him without moving. The weapon was still in her hands, but her expression had changed from rage to disbelief. She looked around the room as though seeing it for the first time. The overturned chair. The open door. The scattered papers. The man she had once loved lying motionless on the floor. Her breathing became shallow. She could have run. She could have dropped the weapon and called someone immediately. Instead, she lowered it. It slipped from her fingers and struck the floor. Vanessa sank down beside the wall. Her mind seemed unable to accept what her hands had done. She remembered their wedding day, their first apartment, the vacations, the arguments, and every moment that had eventually brought them here. She began crying. I just wanted you to understand, she whispered. There was no answer. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Ordinary life continued, while the house held the silence of a marriage that had ended in violence. Vanessa looked at Michael again. Her voice was barely audible. Now you can't leave me. The words remained hanging in the room. And for the first time, Vanessa understood that whatever happened next would no longer be decided by either of them. The words Vanessa whispered remained in the room until the first sirens approached. A neighbor had heard the gunshots and called emergency services. Within minutes, patrol cars stopped outside the Reeves house, their lights washing the windows in alternating flashes. Paramedics entered first, but there was nothing they could do. Michael Reeves was dead. Vanessa had not moved from the wall. When Detective Olivia Grant arrived, officers were already securing the property. Grant stepped through the doorway and immediately noticed the silence. There was no struggle in progress, no frantic attempt to escape, and no confusion about where the weapon had been left. Vanessa sat on the floor. Her hands were visible. Are you Vanessa Reeves? She nodded. Is your husband inside? Vanessa looked toward the living room. Yes. Grant followed her gaze. The scene told a story before Vanessa said a word. 12 sped casings were recovered. The weapon was nearby. Michael's body lay in the room where the confrontation had apparently taken place. Grant did not need to hear Vanessa confess to understand that this had not been an accident. An officer quietly informed her that the victim had been pronounced dead. Grant crouched several feet from Vanessa. I'm going to ask you some questions. You don't have to answer everything right now. Vanessa stared at the floor. He made me do it. Grant remained still. Tell me what happened. Vanessa began describing the marriage. Her voice was uneven, but her story came quickly. She spoke about the surgery, the odor, Michael sleeping in another room, the cruel things he had said, and the discovery of Claire Morgan. He humiliated me, Vanessa whispered. He made me feel worthless. Grant listened. She did not interrupt when Vanessa described the messages between Michael and Claire. She did not challenge her when Vanessa said Michael had been planning a new life while pretending their marriage was simply failing. But Grant had learned that people in traumatic situations often remembered events differently. so she listened for details. Other investigators moved quietly through the house. On the kitchen table, they found divorce documents. In Vanessa's bedroom, they discovered printed screenshots of Michael's conversations with Claire. Several folders contained financial records, photographs, and handwritten notes documenting arguments and dates. The notes were particularly revealing. Vanessa had written about feeling betrayed. She had recorded Michael's statements, his absences, and her growing belief that Claire had replaced her. Grant examined the pages carefully. Some entries were emotional. Others were remarkably organized. She asked an officer to photograph everything. Then Grant returned to Vanessa. "You said Michael attacked you first?" Vanessa nodded. "He was leaving. I thought he was going to abandon me again. Did he threaten you?" "He threatened to leave." "That isn't what I asked." Vanessa hesitated. Grant noticed. "You also said you were afraid he would hurt you." "I was afraid." "Did Michael have a weapon?" "No." "Did he touch you?" Vanessa looked away. "No." Grant let the silence remain. There were other inconsistencies. Vanessa said she had fired because she believed Michael was coming toward her, yet the evidence suggested he had been moving toward the exit. She claimed she had not planned the confrontation, but the weapon had been accessible before Michael arrived. None of these details proved everything, but together, they changed the shape of the story. Grant looked across the room at the divorce papers, the messages, and the weapon. Vanessa had clearly suffered. Michael had clearly betrayed her trust. But suffering did not automatically explain 12 shots. Grant stood slowly. "Vanessa, I believe you were hurting." Vanessa finally looked at her. "But I also think there are parts of tonight you haven't told me yet." For the first time since Grant entered the house, Vanessa said nothing. And that silence told the detective that the investigation had only begun. Grant would find every missing piece before leaving the house. Claire Morgan arrived at the station shortly after sunrise, accompanied by an attorney. She looked exhausted, but unlike Vanessa, she appeared composed enough to answer questions without breaking down. Detective Olivia Grant began carefully. "Tell me about Michael." Claire lowered her eyes. "He was unhappy for a long time." "How long?" "Months. Maybe longer." Claire explained that she and Michael worked together and initially spoke only about work. Their conversations gradually became personal. He confided in her about the marriage, telling her he felt trapped and increasingly afraid of Vanessa's reactions whenever divorce was mentioned. "Did you have an affair?" Claire hesitated. "We became emotionally involved." "Were you physically involved before the divorce?" "No." Grant watched her closely. Claire admitted that Michael had told her he loved her. He had also promised that once the divorce was finalized, they would build a life together. "He said Vanessa wouldn't accept it," Claire said. "He was worried about what she might do." "Did he ever say she threatened him?" "Not directly. He said arguments could become frightening." Claire described one conversation that had stayed with her. Michael had called late at night, speaking in a low voice. "He said he was afraid she would do something impulsive." Grant wrote the statement down. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "I thought he was talking about an emotional reaction. I never imagined this." Meanwhile, investigators were reconstructing the final weeks. They examined phone records, financial documents, security footage, and messages. Each piece added another layer to the collapsing marriage. Michael had certainly manipulated Vanessa emotionally. He had criticized her, withdrawn affection, and continued building a relationship with Claire while still married. His behavior had deepened Vanessa's insecurity. But Vanessa had manipulated him too. She monitored his movements, searched through his belongings, documented his conversations, and repeatedly pressured him to abandon Claire. Her handwritten notes showed an escalating obsession with proving that Michael had betrayed her. Neither behavior excused what happened. Grant understood the difference. A damaged relationship could explain anger. It could explain desperation. It could even explain why someone might lose control during an argument. But 12 shots required something more. Then investigators found the first important clue. A search of Vanessa's phone revealed messages sent before the shooting. She had asked Michael to return to the house, telling him she had something important to discuss. That message alone was not unusual. Then investigators found another. Earlier that afternoon, Vanessa had searched for information about the legal consequences of killing a spouse. Grant read the report twice. The timing changed everything. There was more. A store receipt showed that ammunition had been purchased shortly before the confrontation. Security footage placed Vanessa at the store. When Grant compared the evidence with Vanessa's statement, the inconsistencies became impossible to ignore. Vanessa had insisted the shooting was spontaneous. The evidence suggested otherwise. Grant returned to the interview room. Vanessa sat silently across from her. "You told me Michael drove you to it," Grant said. Vanessa looked up. "He betrayed me." "I know. You heard what he did." "I did." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. Grant placed the evidence folder on the table. "But you didn't tell me that you were preparing for his return." Vanessa stared at the folder. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then her expression changed. The detective knew she had finally reached the truth Vanessa had been trying to hide. Outside the room, officers continued cataloging the evidence. Inside, Grant waited, understanding that the next answer could determine whether this was an impulsive killing or a planned act of revenge from Vanessa herself. The evidence folder remained on the table between Vanessa and Detective Olivia Grant. For several minutes, Vanessa refused to look at it. Grant had seen that reaction before. People sometimes believe silence could keep evidence from becoming real. But the investigation had already moved beyond the emotional story Vanessa had given them. Phone records showed that she had tracked Michael's movements during the weeks before the shooting. She knew when he left work, when he visited Claire, and when he stopped at the house. Investigators also recovered searches from Vanessa's phone. She had searched for Michael's schedule, the location of ammunition stores, and questions about what happened after a spouse was killed. None of those searches proved exactly what she had intended. Together, however, they created a pattern. Grant sat across from her. "You knew he was coming." Vanessa's eyes remained fixed on the floor. "I asked him to come." "Why?" "I wanted to talk." "You could have talked to him anywhere." Vanessa finally looked up. "I wanted him here." Grant waited. Vanessa's voice became quieter. "I wanted him to see what he had done." The detective studied her carefully. "Did you plan to kill him?" Vanessa shook her head immediately. "No." "Did you plan for the possibility that something violent might happen?" Vanessa hesitated. "I thought about what could happen." "What did you imagine?" She swallowed. "I imagined him apologizing. I imagined him admitting that he had destroyed me. I imagined him realizing that Claire wasn't worth losing everything. And if he refused?" Vanessa looked toward the window. "I don't know." But Grant knew that answer was not enough. The interrogation continued for hours. Vanessa described the weeks of humiliation, the surgery, Michael's rejection, and the discovery of Claire. She spoke about feeling replaced and invisible. She said every time Michael told her the marriage was finished, something inside her became smaller. "I wanted him to understand," she said through tears. "I wanted him to feel what I felt." Grant's voice remained calm. "I understand that you were hurting." "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." Vanessa covered her face. "I loved him." The confession came out like a broken breath. "I loved him even when I hated him. I wanted him to choose me. I wanted him to look at me and remember who I was before everything changed." Grant allowed the silence to continue. Vanessa wiped her eyes. He made me feel like I wasn't a woman anymore. That pain was real, Grant said. But Michael did not lose his right to live because he hurt you. Vanessa stared at her. You don't know what he did. I know enough. No, you don't. I know he betrayed you. I know he humiliated you. I know your marriage became deeply unhealthy. Vanessa's breathing trembled. But being betrayed does not give you the right to decide whether another person lives. Vanessa looked down at her hands. For the first time, she seemed unable to defend herself. I didn't mean for it to happen like that. But it did. I just wanted him to listen. He listened. Vanessa began crying again. Grant closed the folder. After several minutes, Vanessa whispered the question she had been carrying since the shooting. Did he suffer? Grant looked at her. She understood what Vanessa was asking, but she would not turn the investigation into another source of comfort or punishment. I'm not going to answer that. Vanessa's face fell. Please. Grant remained silent. The room became painfully still. Vanessa lowered her head, and Grant watched the anger disappear from her expression, replaced by something heavier. For the first time, Vanessa was no longer talking about what Michael had done to her. She was beginning to understand what she had done to him. The truth she had spent weeks resisting was finally becoming impossible to escape, and Grant knew the next question would matter deeply. The courtroom was crowded on the morning Vanessa's trial began. For the first time, the private collapse of the Reeves marriage was no longer confined to their home, their phones, or the people who had known them personally. Everything was about to become public. Vanessa entered quietly, wearing a plain suit and keeping her eyes lowered. She looked smaller than she had before the shooting. The anger that had once consumed her was harder to see now. In its place was exhaustion. The prosecutor presented the case simply. Michael Reeves had come to the house after Vanessa asked him to return. He had intended to discuss their divorce. Vanessa had confronted him, taken out a firearm, and fired 12 times. The prosecution argued that the killing was not an accident or an uncontrollable reaction. It was revenge. The defense did not deny the shooting. Instead, Vanessa's attorney described the emotional deterioration that had preceded it. He spoke about humiliation, rejection, betrayal, and a marriage that had become psychologically destructive. He described Vanessa's struggle after surgery and the effect Michael's words had on her confidence. She was not thinking like the woman she had once been, he told the jury. She was drowning emotionally. But the prosecution responded that emotional suffering could explain a person's state of mind without excusing murder. Claire Morgan was among the first major witnesses. She described meeting Michael through work and gradually becoming emotionally close to him. Her voice shook when she admitted that their relationship had crossed boundaries before the divorce was finalized. He told me he was unhappy, Claire said. He said he wanted to leave. The prosecutor asked whether Michael had planned to marry her. Yes. Claire paused before adding that Michael had also been afraid of Vanessa's reactions. Across the courtroom, Vanessa listened without looking at her. Then Vanessa's friends testified. Melissa described how Vanessa had changed after the marriage began collapsing. She spoke about isolation, obsessive thoughts, and the hours Vanessa spent collecting messages and documents. She stopped sleeping, Melissa said. She stopped trusting everyone. The defense presented those details as evidence of Vanessa's psychological deterioration. The prosecution presented them differently. Investigators displayed screenshots, phone records, ammunition receipts, and searches recovered from Vanessa's phone. They showed that she had tracked Michael's movements and researched information connected to the shooting before asking him to return home. One photograph showed the folders Vanessa had created. Another showed the divorce papers. The evidence made the courtroom painfully quiet. Vanessa watched her private life being reconstructed piece by piece. Every message between Michael and Claire was read aloud. Every argument became evidence. Every humiliating conversation became part of the official record. The odor she had once been terrified anyone might know about was discussed publicly. Her surgery was discussed. Michael's rejection was discussed. His affair was discussed. Nothing remained private. Vanessa had spent months believing humiliation was the worst thing Michael had ever given her. Now she realized that the courtroom was preserving those humiliations permanently. During closing arguments, the prosecutor asked the jury to consider a difficult question. How much suffering can explain violence before explanation becomes excuse? No one in the courtroom answered. Vanessa lowered her eyes. For the first time, she understood that the trial was not simply deciding whether Michael had betrayed her. It was deciding what she had chosen to do with that betrayal. And soon, the jury would have to decide what that choice was worth. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited for detail, while inside, Vanessa sat silently, knowing the next words could determine the rest of her life. The jury returned its verdict just after noon. Vanessa stood beside her attorney, hands folded tightly in front of her. She stared at the courtroom floor as the judge called everyone to order. The foreperson stood. We find the defendant guilty of murder. The words seemed to pass through Vanessa without reaching her. She had imagined this moment many times. Instead, there was only emptiness. Michael was still dead. The divorce was still over. Claire was gone from her life. And Vanessa would now have to live with the consequences of 12 shots fired inside the home they had once shared. At sentencing, the judge spoke about the pain Vanessa had experienced but made clear that pain could not erase responsibility. The court imposed a lengthy prison sentence. Vanessa listened without looking at anyone. When officers led her away, she briefly turned toward the gallery. Michael's family sat together, silent. His mother looked older than Vanessa remembered. His brother stared at the floor. There were no words that could repair what had happened. The verdict gave legal closure, but not emotional resolution for Vanessa. Outside the courthouse, Claire Morgan was already preparing to leave town. The attention had become unbearable. Reporters waited outside her workplace. Strangers recognized her from photographs shown during the trial. Every mention of Michael's name seemed to pull her back into a story she wanted to escape. She packed quietly and moved away, leaving behind the office where she had first met him. Michael's family struggled differently. Some blamed Vanessa completely. Others blamed Michael for allowing the marriage to deteriorate while building another relationship. There were arguments over whether he should have left sooner, whether Vanessa's suffering had been ignored, and whether anyone could have prevented the final confrontation. Eventually, they understood something painful. The marriage had been broken long before the shooting. The gun had ended Michael's life, but resentment had been destroying the relationship for years. Detective Olivia Grant returned to her office after the case closed. She reviewed the photographs one final time, then placed the file inside a cabinet. She had investigated murders before, but this case stayed with her. It had never really been about one insult. It had not been about one affair. It had not even been about one divorce. Those things had been pieces of the story, but they were not the whole story. The real danger had been resentment. Michael allowed cruelty and betrayal to replace honesty. Vanessa allowed humiliation and anger to consume her judgment. Both kept returning to old wounds, until neither could see a future beyond the conflict. Grant closed the file. She knew relationships could survive betrayal, separation, and disappointment. But once resentment became more important than judgment, every decision could become dangerous. The Reeves marriage had ended long before Michael died. The 12 shots were simply the moment when its destruction became impossible to hide. And somewhere behind prison walls, Vanessa would have the rest of her life to understand that difference. Months passed before Vanessa stopped waking from dreams in which Michael was still alive. In those dreams, they were back in their kitchen, arguing about ordinary things. Sometimes he apologized. Sometimes he simply walked away. She would wake before either ending, staring at the ceiling of her prison cell while reality returned. Michael was dead. She had killed him. The anger that once seemed endless had faded. What remained was quieter and harder to escape. Guilt. Vanessa began remembering moments she had once dismissed. Michael waiting after work. Their first anniversary. The way he laughed when she burned dinner. Those memories no longer felt like proof that he had betrayed her. They felt like pieces of a life that could never be recovered. She understood that Michael had hurt her, but she had answered that pain was something irreversible. There would be no reconciliation. No apology could restore him. Months later, the Reeves home stood empty. The furniture had been removed. The photographs were gone. The kitchen table where they had argued was bare. Dust gathered along the windowsills, and sunlight crossed the rooms without finding anyone there. Detective Olivia Grant visited the property once more. She stood quietly in the living room. The house no longer carried shouting, accusations, or footsteps. It was simply empty. Grant had learned that relationships could become prisons long before anyone noticed the bars. People could remain trapped inside resentment and humiliation until leaving seemed impossible. But betrayal, however painful, never gave someone permission to destroy another life. That truth remained at the center of the case. Vanessa had once believed that killing Michael would prevent him from leaving her. She had been wrong. Michael had left anyway. He left the marriage. He left the house. And then, because of 12 bullets, he left the world. Vanessa had wanted to stop losing him. Instead, she guaranteed that she would spend the rest of her life without him. The house remained silent as Grant walked toward the door. Behind her, the empty rooms held no answers for anyone. Outside, the street continued as it always had. Cars passed. The world did not stop for Michael, Vanessa, or the tragedy that had consumed them. Inside Vanessa, the past would never become quiet. She would carry Michael's memory forever, and the painful knowledge that the final act of their marriage was a decision she could never undo.